and then start broadcast.
Okay, welcome back. Thanks for coming back for such joyous occasions. Any questions? Any thoughts? I just want to hear what you're thinking. Remember the 50%, blah blah, but you have to fill in the gaps, and it helps me understand. It also should actually help you as well to articulate what you're thinking and feeling, ideas or questions or want to clarify.
You talk about seeing emptiness.
Yeah.
Completely.
Directly. Yeah.
How about experiencing emptiness directly? Is that something
Perfect.
else as well?
No, it's the same thing. Yeah, so seeing emptiness directly is just a synonym for having that visceral experience. Yeah, you don't actually see it because you're not aware of yourself seeing anything.
So when you see visceral,
Yeah.
how
do I?
Visceral, like something that happens physically.
Yeah, but you only are aware of that after you come out of the experience. Have you ever been so lost in a movie that when you came to, when you realized you were sitting on the chair watching a movie, you realized time lapsed? Or when you're driving to a place with a certain state of mind and you don't know how you got through the three lights?
Happens all the time.
Well, that's not it, no. But it's that kind of losing yourself in the experience. And when you come out of that, you have that physical sensation that something just transpired. That's the visceral, I mean.
So I think I've had that once.
Yeah.
And it was almost frightening
Yeah.
after I came out of it.
Yeah.
I didn't know what it
You
was.
need to go see a doctor. No, it's serious. I mean, to figure out what that was. You will get clues from the rest of what I'm going to talk about today, hopefully. Certainly through the entire Buddhist canon and the explanation in depth. I mean, people spend years in the monasteries of Tibet figuring out dependent origination. Years. We're spending a section of a 2-hour class. So I'm only ever really giving you a flavor of this. And if it's connecting to some experience you've had before or some idea about your reality, that's got to have some meaning for you. You have to investigate. Yeah. We can't fix it today, but hey. All I can tell you is I didn't want to be a Buddhist. Yeah. I was an utter atheist, but I was agnostic before that, and I didn't want anything to do with any kind of organized thinking, let alone religion. I only was interested in the stories. There's got to be something in the stories, yeah? And then I met this way of thinking and viewing the world, and it was like someone put a stamp in my head that I couldn't remove that view because it made more sense than any other view I had manufactured or had already been implanted. Does that make sense? My conditioning. It just stamped something over my conditioning and gave reasons for things that I had no reasons for. And that's at the logical sense. Yeah? That's got to be happening to you at some point and throughout this experience. Why else would you be in this room? But then there are non-rational clues. These are the rational clues, right? The things that say, oh, that makes sense more than this, and that has more a reason than this reason. That's the logical stuff. The non-logical stuff, the gut stuff, I can't even, even if I shared it with you, you wouldn't know what it means to you. I'll give you one, the one that got me to come back to the second class with Geshe Michael Roach. I had a reoccurring dream as a child where I had this vertigo sensation because there was this, I was sitting like this in black space and it just was a reoccurring dream. It made me want to vomit. It made me sick. That pit feeling in the stomach. It gave me that feeling because I was sitting there and I was in front of the tiniest object. It was so tiny that it had like negative gravity. It made me want to vomit. And within an instant, it grew so large that I couldn't see the edges, and I was the tiny object. And it was the most massive thing in space. And it gave me the inverse of that vomitous feeling. And I'd wake up crying every time as a child. It happened for a long time. And I'd forgotten about it through a teenage years. And then I came to New York and I sat in a class. I didn't like meeting Geshe Michael Roach. I thought he was annoying. Seriously. He's just some Western dude in a funny dress. Honestly, I thought that. You know? And some of the stuff he said made sense. Like, the world doesn't work the way we think it works. And yet we get used to it. And that made sense, and I didn't like that it made sense because he was wearing the dress. You know? It's true. And then he's mentioned something about a specific type of Tibetan meditation where you do this swap thing, but then he talked about a specific type of that where you make yourself infinitely small and the thing is infinitely big. It was just a one-liner, nobody else. He just threw it out there as a one-liner. And it triggered in my mind this non-rational memory of that childhood dream. Whether I liked it or not, I was hooked to coming to the next class to figure out what the hell that was. And you know, Gary, the rest of the stuff, how I got to that first class in the first place. So there's a bunch of non-rational things that are happening to you right now that we get trained out of paying attention to because we live in this material world. That was my other joke. I did really good jokes, guys. So pay attention to what's happening to the non-rational, because we spend our time in the West 90–95% of the time doing charts and stats and figures and counting and doing all the Excel spreadsheets, measuring and exploding particles to try and make sense of a world that doesn't make sense when you look at the stuff. The rational, the linear. And then you look at the non-rational. How do you explain that sensation to someone? How do you explain that knowing, that gut feel, that experience you had? How do you measure it? Draw me a picture. It doesn't exist in the West. Listen to that part. That part that's growing, that's something. That's the inverse of the outside. The non-rational has been slapped out of us in the West because we need to shop. We need to buy more houses. We need to get more jobs. We need to get an education. You get the stuff, you'd be happy. Now, how come we're not happy? There's no listening to that stuff. This is showing you how to get to that stuff. And it's doing it in a linear way. Here's a painting of it, here's a drawing of it, here's a list of it. So I'm going to tell you a couple of things about dependent origination. The Buddha taught 3 different ways of looking at dependent origination. All of them were done on purpose for people with different capacities, different ways of looking at the world. Some things made sense to an idiot like me, some people made sense to a more intelligent person like you, someone made sense to a super intelligent person. Yep. But there are 4 schools of Buddhism: the Abhidharma, the Logic, the Mind Only, and the Majjhimika school. These are 4 schools of Buddhist thinking in ancient India. The first 3 schools, the Mind Only, the Logic school, and the Abhidharma school, have a view. When the Buddha said dependent origination, when they saw this world, they said, what does this mean? How does that make sense of this world that doesn't make sense? What does dependent origination mean when we investigate reality? For those first 3 schools, it means that things come from their causes. Dependent origination for that first level of Buddhist thinking is things come from their causes, brackets and conditions. A tree comes from a seed, the conditions are water and so on and so on. Yeah? I'm going to do the pen for those of you who have seen it. This pen comes from a designer and plastic. Yeah, it comes from its causes. Something produced it, a machine made it. That's what dependent origination means about the appearance of this pen from the first three schools of Buddhism, the Abhidharma, the Detailist, and the Mind-Only school. It's a fourth school of Buddhism, or the Majjhimika school, and that's got two parts to it. That is called the highest school, and it's got the highest part of the highest school, or the low part of the highest school. Yeah? So Majjhimika 1 or Majjhimika 2, we call them. They have slightly different interpretation of what dependent origination means. So the second school, the first Majjhimika school says that dependent origination means things are dependent on their parts. I'll tell you what this all means in a second, but you need to understand that there's three different ways of understanding the world. Where did this come from? The first schools say it's caused by something. Plastic made it, and people designed it, and the rest. Then people say, well, that's okay for most things in our world, in our reality, in our existence. You can explain most things that way, but how do you explain concepts? What are the true causes of concepts? How do you explain the idea of space that gets filled out by this computer, and then when they remove the computer, the space is there? Well, nothing caused that. And how come that can't depend on its causes? There's no cause for that. It's there. The idea of emptiness is not caused. It is. It's a law of existence. It's a realm of reality. It's not caused. The experience of it is caused. The thing is not caused. So that first explanation in the early Buddhist thinking of what dependent origination meant helps people get to figure out, okay, so this is made up of stuff. If I know how to make more, get the right stuff, I can make more of these things. If I know how to get the right education, I can get the right job, I can make some money. It's like that thinking of dependent origination. There's a cause for most of it, but it doesn't cover all of it. The second way of looking at dependent origination is that things are dependent on their parts. So there's the top part of the pen, there's the bottom part of the pen, and the ink part of the pen, and when you put all those parts together, you end up with a thing called a pen, or a job, or the money, or the rest. That's a different way of thinking, and it includes more of the unexplainable. Yeah? So there's a part to the space. There's a left part and a right part. That's what makes the space. And so you can begin to explain more of reality looking at dependent origination, which is a key to Buddhism, that way. But the highest way to explain dependent origination is that it depends on your projections. It is utterly, everything is utterly and totally dependent, yes, but not on its parts, not on its causes, but on the viewer, on the mind experiencing that thing. When you look at reality that way, you can explain absolutely everything, without exception. It is the highest way of thinking, and again, people are trained for years in this understanding. You're only getting a seed of it today, but if it's resonating at some level, you've got a seed already. So things are dependent on your projections. We get those three. I need you to understand those three different ways to interpret dependent origination, because dependent origination is what gets you dead. It's what gets you through the 12 links to the last link of aging and death. Understanding how to undo that gets you to nirvana. So if you get this at some level, you've already started feeding that seed that can pop you into an experience of seeing emptiness directly. The only way you see emptiness directly is like Hing Pudrayana having a visceral experience of dependent origination. So let's just review for a second. The first level of thinking of dependent origination is that things depend on
Causes.
their causes. So what's the cause of this?
Materials.
What's the cause of my yelling boss?
Causes.
Hmm?
His young bucks.
It could be his yelling boss if he's got that habit, or it could be I pissed him off. Yeah, yeah, but something outside him made it, right? Something caused it. Good. What's the second level of thinking about dependent origination? That things depend on their parts. From a Western point of view, that could be at an atomic level. You can break my arms down to the point where you get an atom, right? How does that help you though? So, you know, I can't get enough relationships. I can't get enough of them. I'm hungry for them. So understanding that they're made up of atoms, those beautiful eggs or whatever it is are made up of atoms, how does that stop me from liking them and behaving inappropriately towards them? It doesn't. So it's made up of atoms. Why those atoms and not those atoms? If it's atoms. So that second point of view of dependent origination is good to figure out some of the other stuff, but it doesn't answer why things don't work. And then you get to the highest level of dependent origination, which is, where does this pen come from?
From me.
From your projection. What does that mean? Did you make a pen? I can do my favorite joke now. I wonder where the pen is. That's a really funny joke. Sorry. What does that mean that you're projecting the pen? But I've got the pen. How can you be projecting this pen? This is crucial. It's so simple you will miss it. It's the the emptiness of the pen. If you pay attention for the next 5 minutes, you could get onto something that can shift your entire existence. Remember those 3 levels of reality? And I'm serious. If you pay attention to what's happening next, and you've got the right seats in your head, this could shift the entire way you look at the rest of your life. What does it mean that you're projecting a pen? Is there a pen coming from here over there?
No.
I could easily see something different.
But,
You're telling me it's a pen, but I could easily see it as something else.
but what do you really see? Honest.
I see.
You see a pen. Who does not see a pen? Does that make it a pen? Why not?
It's the idea.
This thing,
It could be something that's something else.
it could be something completely different. This thing that does this, that writes and functions and works like a pen for us, can be perceived by any other being as not a pen. If it was pen, they must see it as a pen. You find one individual, one human being that has never seen a pen before, one dog that's never written with a pen before, one ant crawling along the surface, one fly getting my sweat off of it for food. It's not a pen for them. And they are experiencing this very same thing that you are experiencing and we are experiencing as a pen. If it was pen, and this is so simple we miss it, if it was pen, it must force pen out onto everything that experiences it. It must do, if its penness came from it. Do we get that? Yeah? If its penness came from it, every single being ever seeing this thing must see it as a pen. That's problem number 1. We know that doesn't happen. A dog will come here and it will see a chewable object. It will want to chew it and destroy it, or lick it, or something. We can't convince the dog that it's a pen, like your mum taught you it was a pen. See, the fact that your mum taught you it was a pen, or your teacher, means that you have some seeds in your mind that allow you to see it as a pen. That's what it means to be locked in the human realm. We are forced to experience things in a certain way. That's what it means to be in an animal realm. It's not that you're stuffed in an animal body, it's that your experience of this place, this same object, is radically different to yours for a dog. No telling the dog that this is a pen will make them see a pen, ever. And even though you can understand that it could be a chewable object, I dare you not to think of it as a pen. You're forced to see it as a pen. You have no choice but to see it as a pen. That is what it is to be a human mind. That is what it is to be an animal mind. Now get this. That is the emptiness of the pen. There is no pen coming from this thing. When you look for a pen that comes from this object, this cylinder, you can't find one. Even though we're all convinced it is. But logically, you cannot find it. When you look for it and you come up empty. You can't find it. That's what emptiness is. So how does that relate to dependent origination? They're both different sides of the same coin. They're like this. Dependent origination, you are forced to see it as a pen because of some stuff you don't understand. That's ignorance. Because of some stuff you don't understand, you must see it as a pen. That's dependent origination. Because it's emptiness, because of its emptiness, because it has no character of its own, you are able to see it as a pen. Emptiness one side, dependent origination another. A dog is forced to see it as a chewable object. It has no choice. In fact, if such a thing existed as a pen from its own side, if really there was a pen here, projecting out to you penness, it could never change. It must always stay pen. The fact that it changes into someday not becoming a pen means it's empty of penness as well. That's another level. Yeah? Are you okay lightly with those two topics? Dependent origination and emptiness. These are key peak experiences. You have to know that the first link, and we're going to touch on this now, the first link of the wheel is ignorance. It's the same as the pig. It's depicted as a blind woman, usually dressed in white, because in ancient India, if you were widowed, you'd be dressed in white and put into some kind of female nursing home where nobody would touch you, because you've been soiled. I mean, we don't like to think about life that way, but that's the way it was. So you'd be dressed in white, so everybody would know you've been widowed. And that's bad enough. You're untouchable. You've got no future in India. You'd be put in a home for women that have been touched. So, even though this one's gold, the original painting she was white. She's holding a cane. She is blind. So not only is she a woman that's untouchable, that's been widowed, which in ancient India, this icon meant so many things that it doesn't mean to us. Yeah? But on top of that, she's lost in the world, blind, cannot navigate her world. That means ignorance. The first link of dependent origination. And this is where you could break the wheel. Ignorance of what? What do you think she's ignorant of?
Seeing true nature of things.
Seeing the true nature of things. She doesn't know, like we don't know, how things really work. Why we get money when we go to the job. Why we get angry when the boss yells. We know how it happens most of the time, so we think we know it works. And so we get into this lulled sense of security that we've figured out our world because we were happy, we were born in this realm where things are abundant. What about all the other poor bastards like me that grew up in Argentina? South America, Africa, Asia, the rest of the planet, 6.9 billion people or whatever it is now. 4.17 of them dying right now. Now, every second. Going through this cycle. Like all of us. What do you think happened to the people 150 years ago? All of them. They tried to figure it out too, and they bought houses, and had babies, and had relationships. They tried to figure it out. And some people figured it out. Ignorance of not knowing how things really work, where suffering truly comes from. Why, when you try something, it doesn't work. In fact, when you get that peak experience of having seen emptiness directly, you realize, one of the things I failed to say before, you realize that for the very first time in your spaghetti noodle existence of your mind, you've had a correct perception. For the very first time in your entire life, you realize that everything you've done up to that point was wrong. That wanting somebody to love you didn't cause them to love you. It was wrong. That going to the job and trying to get the promotion better than the other person so you get more money was wrong. It didn't cost you money. You have an experience that for the first time you saw the true nature of things. When you have that experience, seeing emptiness directly, or what did you call it? Experiencing emptiness, you smash this first link. You smash it. And then all the cyclical things that are coming your way because of everything you've ever done start breaking down. All the way from the tiniest annoyances, from the shittiest boss, the aggravating friend, the horrible this, the horrible that, and you begin to experience life and begin to realize that you can create happinesses because you've figured out how to put the causes and conditions, the dependent origination of the right way of liking and disliking. It's like you create a different wheel, one that's self-perpetuating, that is not locked in death, that's outside. That's the Buddha. We'll talk about that state of being in the next class. So having ignorance of how things work, not knowing, actually it's not that we don't even know, it's we have a misknowing of how they work. We think we know how to make money, and we make the mistake of doing it over and over and over in the wrong way, which causes us link number 2, which is karma. And this is a potter making pots of all sorts of shapes. He's busy making pots out of clay. These pots are what hold your experiences. In fact, in Buddhism, we say 65 instances of karma every millisecond, every finger click are happening in your world. Like a movie being projected, you're making 65 new pots every second, every millisecond, every finger click. What kind of pots? Liking and disliking pots, liking and disliking, because you don't understand where it comes from. So you think by jumping the queue, you're going to get first. And so we think that jumping the queue gets us first because we jumped the queue when we got first. So we know now to make that a habit, a karma. Yeah? The problem with karma is that it's got a time delay. The result you experienced just then had nothing to do with you jumping the queue. In fact, that was already set in motion by pots you put into your mind a long time before. And the idea of karma in the West needs some explaining. We don't have time to do it next, I'm already over. And we'll touch on that the next course. We'll begin with karma, explaining karma more clearly. I'll leave you with this though. If we knew how karma worked, the correct way of thinking of karma, as we step down on the cockroach to kill it and extinguish its life, our ribs would start to contract if it was instant. If jumping the queue really got you first, then as you step on the cockroach and killed it, you'd die. So instantly, as you feel the pressure of your foot on its back and your ribs contracting, what do? You pull back, you step back. If karma was instant, we'd be very different people. But the problem with the state of not knowing is not knowing that things work that way, that there's this time delay. So because we don't know, we jump the queue. We cheat to get the promotion. Yeah? We give a little white lie to get more of what we want ignorantly, the chicken. And avoid the people we don't like, the snake. Because we don't know, because we're ignorant of how things really work. But if you train your mind like a pianist, figuring out the scales, how do I meditate? How do I understand dependent origination? Who are the people that have had these peak experiences, and what can I learn from them and make it my experience so I can turn my world into something that works predictably, not sometimes, all the time. And if you have that little bit of childhood hope, the thing that got bashed out of us from asking why do people die? Why did Auntie die? I wished it to be different, but she did. If you have a little bit of that innocence in you that's still alive, it's not being beaten out of you, then it's also possible to stop aging and death. And it's not magic love, because it's also caused, it's also dependent on something. You figure out what it depends on, what it was caused by, and you can stop it. And if you figure that out, you draw a painting and you give it to someone that you know is going to have a big experience, and you watch them do it. I'm so excited to talk about this. So, any questions? I hope you have lots of thinking time about the implications of this on the tiniest hurts in your life. Really question where the tiniest happiness comes from for you. And I hope that something over the next week sort of touches you that allows you to have some hope, more than the hope we have about going to work and hoping that things work out. That's this blind hope. That you've touched on something, or something's awoken, or that you've heard something unique that can really help you. The mandala offering is now we're trying to imagine that if all this stuff was true, that you could actually create a perfect universe where there's zero suffering. In fact, there's nothing but bliss for every being in it. And we're just offering and putting that out there. What's it's doing, it's actually creating the habit in your mind for that to be possible. And then we're going to offer it away for everybody. So, So if you just try and imagine every person or every being that you know having a sense of ultimate happiness, removal of all suffering, just for an instant. That just for an instant, everybody you knew or knew of was removed from any suffering at all, and wish that upon them. And then remember that being that was on top of your crown of your head, imagine them coming down through the center of your spine into your heart. Resting there.
you, teacher.
Come back. Thanks.